When that movie came out, was anything cut from that film?
The studio actually legally couldn't. And then I said, action! And everybody flew out of Warner Brothers onto the street, onto Burbank Avenue.
You're watching one of the most famous comedy movies ever made, and right there in the middle of all the chaos, a complete stranger walks through the shot. Not an actor, not an extra, just some random guy who happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. And guess what? The director loved it so much, he kept it in the movie. This is the incredible true story of the biggest blooper in Blazing Saddles that somehow became one of its best moments. But wait, there's so much more to this story. We're going to dive deep into the wild world of Mel Brooks's masterpiece, a movie that almost never saw the light of day because the studio bosses thought it was too crazy, too offensive, and too weird for audiences. They had no idea they were sitting on a comedy goldmine that would change Hollywood forever. Let me take you back to 1974, when America was going through some really tough times. The Vietnam War had just ended, and people were angry and confused. Trust in the government was at an all-time low because of the Watergate scandal. It was during this crazy time that Mel Brooks decided to make a movie that would poke fun at everything Americans held sacred, especially those classic cowboy movies we all grew up watching. You see, for decades, Hollywood had been making westerns that showed white cowboys as the good guys, and everyone else as either villains or background characters. These movies painted a picture of the Old West that was clean, heroic, and completely fake. Mel Brooks looked at all of this and said, "I'm going to blow this whole thing up." And that's exactly what he did. The story of Blazing Saddles is actually pretty simple when you break it down. There's this greedy businessman who wants to steal land from a small town called Rock Ridge. His evil plan is to get the governor to appoint a black sheriff, thinking the racist townspeople will panic and leave. But here's the twist. The new sheriff, a character named Bart, turns out to be smarter and more capable than anyone expected. What starts as a mean trick turns into an amazing story about fighting prejudice with humor and intelligence. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Mel Brooks didn't write this movie alone. He had help from Richard Pryor, one of the most fearless comedians of all time. Pryor knew how to write jokes that hit hard and made people think. Together, they created a script that would make fun of racists, politicians, and pretty much everyone else. They weren't trying to be polite or gentle. They wanted to slap people in the face with the truth and then make them laugh about how ridiculous everything was. But the road to making this movie was full of problems from the very beginning. Richard Pryor was actually supposed to play the main character, Sheriff Bart. He had co-written the script, understood the character perfectly, and had the comedic timing to pull it off. But Warner Brothers, the movie studio, refused to let him act in the film. Why? Because Pryor had gotten in trouble with drugs, and the studio was afraid he was too risky to insure. Without insurance, they couldn't legally let him work on set. This was a huge blow to the movie because Pryor's voice and vision were built right into the character. The studio had to find someone else who could handle the comedy, carry the weight of the social commentary, and be the star of a very risky film. That person turned out to be Cleavon Little, a trained stage actor who had worked on Broadway, but hadn't done much film work. Little brought something completely different to the role. Where Pryor might have been fiery and aggressive, Little was cool and controlled. He played Bart with this perfect mix of intelligence and calm confidence that made the racial jokes work even better. When his character has to pull a gun on himself to escape from angry townspeople, Little doesn't overact or get dramatic. He keeps it smooth and clever, which makes the whole scene even funnier and more powerful. But the casting problems didn't stop there. The role of the Waco Kid, Bart's sidekick and friend, was originally given to an actor named Gig Young. Young was a serious dramatic actor who had even won an Academy Award. On paper, he seemed perfect for the part of an aging gunslinger with a drinking problem. But there was one major issue the studio didn't know about. Young was battling alcoholism in real life. On his very first day of filming, Young collapsed on set while trying to film a scene where his character wakes up hanging upside down in a jail cell. The crew quickly realized he was going through alcohol withdrawal and couldn't continue working. Mel Brooks had to fire him immediately and find a replacement fast. That's when Brooks called Gene Wilder, who had worked with him before on another movie called The Producers. Wilder was known for playing strange, sensitive characters who were a little bit crazy, but also very lovable. When Brooks explained the Waco Kid character, a washed-up gunslinger with a good heart, Wilder immediately said yes. He flew out to the movie set the very next day and started filming right away. This last-minute casting change turned out to be pure magic. Wilder brought this calm, spaced-out quality to his character that perfectly balanced all the chaos happening around him. His timing was absolutely perfect, and the friendship between his character and Cleavon Little's Riff Bart became one of the best parts of the entire movie. They played off each other like they had been working together for years. Now, let's talk about the scene that made Blazing Saddles famous before anyone even knew what hit them. The campfire scene. Picture a group of tough cowboys sitting around a fire, eating beans and, well, let's just say they're dealing with the natural consequences of eating too many beans. In 1974, no major Hollywood movie had ever included bathroom humor with full sound effects. It was considered too crude, too lowbrow, and definitely not suitable for mainstream audiences. But Mel Brooks didn't just include one or two sound effects. After the first test screening, he actually went back and added even more because the audience was laughing so hard they couldn't hear the rest of the jokes. The studio executives at Warner Brothers were horrified. They called it vulgar and pointless and begged Brooks to cut it out. Brooks refused, and he had a very good reason. For decades, Western movies had shown cowboys as these mythical heroic figures who were always clean, strong, and dignified. Brooks wanted to destroy that fake image and show cowboys as real people who got dirty, smelly, and dealt with the same bodily functions as everyone else. It was a small scene, but it completely changed how people thought about the cowboy myth that Hollywood had been selling for years. The studio's panic about the campfire scene was nothing compared to how they reacted when they saw the final cut of the entire movie. The executives sat in a screening room and watched Blazing Saddles in complete silence. Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped. When the credits rolled, the room was dead quiet. One executive reportedly said it was too vulgar for American audiences. Another called it career-ending. They were convinced the movie would be a disaster that would embarrass everyone involved. But here's the thing. Mel Brooks had something most directors only dream of. He had final cut authority written into his contract, which meant the studio legally couldn't change or censor his film without his permission. For most filmmakers, this is the ultimate goal. For Warner Brothers, it became their worst nightmare because they couldn't fix what they thought was broken. The head of Warner Brothers at the time was a man named Ted Ashley, and he made it very clear that he wanted to bury Blazing Saddles quietly. According to people who worked at the studio, Ashley told his team to release the film in just a few major cities and then pull it from theaters as quickly as possible. The plan was to test the waters. If it flopped, nobody would notice. If it caused too much controversy, they could blame the filmmaker and move on. But Mel Brooks wasn't about to let his movie disappear without a fight. He had been through this kind of resistance before with The Producers, which had also made people uncomfortable, but ended up winning him an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. Brooks believed that what he had created wasn't just funny. It was the kind of comedy that would make people think differently about the world around them. He was convinced that audiences were ready for something this bold and honest. The tension between Brooks and the studio got even worse when some big-name actors turned down roles in the film. John Wayne, the biggest Western star of all time, was offered a cameo appearance and turned it down flat. He told Brooks that the script was too blue, which was old Hollywood code for too dirty and inappropriate. Wayne reportedly said he couldn't be in it, but he would be first in line to see it when it came out. That kind of reaction only made the studio executives more nervous about what they had on their hands. Despite all the behind-the-scenes drama, there were also moments of pure accidental genius that happened during filming. The most famous of these occurs during the movie's crazy final battle scene. In this sequence, The characters break out of their fictional Western town and spill onto the actual Warner Brothers studio lot. It's supposed to be chaotic and absurd, with actors fighting through fake saloons, crashing into other movie sets, and eventually ending up on a real Hollywood street. During one of these outdoor shots, as the cast runs through the studio gates and onto the street, something unexpected happens. A man wearing a regular sweater walks calmly through the middle of the scene. He's not wearing a costume. He's not an extra. And he's definitely not supposed to be there. He was just a random person who happened to be walking by when the cameras were rolling. A complete stranger who accidentally wandered into movie history. When the crew realized what had happened, they expected Mel Brooks to be furious and demand they reshoot the scene. Instead, Brooks watched the footage and started laughing. He told everyone to leave the man in the final cut because it made the scene even funnier and more absurd. That random pedestrian became an accidental part of one of the most famous comedies ever made, and most people who watch the movie don't even notice he doesn't belong there. This kind of happy accident perfectly captures what made Blazing Saddles so special. Brooks had built his entire filmmaking style around unpredictability and chaos. He encouraged his actors to improvise, to break character when something funny happened, and to play around with the timing of their lines. Some of the best moments in the film weren't even in the original script. They just happened naturally when creative people were given the freedom to experiment. Gene Wilder was particularly good at this kind of improvisation. His character, the Waco Kid, was supposed to be this washed-up gunslinger, but Wilder played him with such a relaxed, offhand style that he often changed his lines while the cameras were rolling. His delivery was so natural and funny that Brooks usually kept whatever Wilder came up with instead of what was written on the page. Cleavon Little also brought his own special touch to Sheriff Bart. His facial expressions, dry sense of humor, and quiet intelligence weren't necessarily written into the script. They emerged from Little's own personality and acting choices. He made Bart feel like a real person who just happened to be incredibly smart and funny, rather than a character who existed just to deliver jokes. Even the supporting actors got in on the improvisation. Madeline Kahn, who played the seductive Lily von Stupp, made up several of her most memorable lines on the spot. Her breathy, off-key performance of the song I'm Tired was largely improvised, and it became one of the most quoted scenes in the entire movie. One of the most surreal moments in Blazing Saddles happens during a flashback to Bart's childhood. In this scene, young Bart and his family are surrounded by what looks like a group of threatening Native American warriors on horseback. The audience expects violence or danger, but then something completely unexpected happens. The tribal chief, played by Mel Brooks himself, starts speaking, not in Apache or any other indigenous language, but in Yiddish, the traditional language of Eastern European Jews. The other warriors nod along as if this makes perfect sense, and one even shouts, Shabbos. The whole scene is jarring and hilarious, but it's also making a very serious point. Brooks knew that classic Western movies had always portrayed Native Americans as the other, mysterious, threatening foreigners who were rarely given real dialogue or human characteristics. By having them speak Yiddish, Brooks was pointing out how shallow and ridiculous those old movie stereotypes really were. This blend of absurd comedy and sharp social commentary shows up throughout the entire film. Even the opening theme song is a perfect example of this approach. The song, simply called Blazing Saddles, is performed by Frankie Laine, a famous singer known for serious, emotional Western ballads. His voice is rich and powerful, and he sings every word like he's performing the theme to a dramatic epic like High Noon. But here's the genius part. Mel Brooks told the crew not to let Laine know that Blazing Saddles was a comedy. In Laine's mind, he was singing the theme song to a serious Western drama. Every note is delivered with complete sincerity, even though the lyrics are full of exaggerated cliches and over-the-top imagery that are clearly meant to be funny. The result is pure irony. A song so serious it becomes ridiculous. When Blazing Saddles finally premiered in February 1974, something amazing happened that nobody at Warner Brothers expected. The limited release in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago was an immediate hit. Theaters were packed, audiences were laughing until they cried, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. Some theaters had to extend their runs indefinitely because people kept coming back to see it again and bring their friends. Warner Brothers, suddenly realizing they had completely misread the situation, scrambled to expand distribution to more cities across the country. The movie they had wanted to bury quietly became the biggest comedy hit of the year, eventually earning over $100 million at the box office. All because one director decided to fight an entire studio system to get his vision on screen. The success of Blazing Saddles changed Hollywood in ways that are still felt today. It proved that audiences were hungry for comedy, that took risks, and said something important about society. It showed that you could make people laugh, while also making them think about serious issues like racism and prejudice. And it demonstrated that sometimes the best moments in movies are the ones that happen by accident, when creative people are given the freedom to experiment and take chances. Looking back at Blazing Saddles today, it's clear that the random man in the sweater who walked through that final scene represents something bigger than just a funny blow. Opir. He represents the beautiful chaos that happens when filmmakers are brave enough to break the rules and trust that audiences are smart enough to appreciate something truly original. The fact that Mel Brooks kept that accidental moment in the final cut tells us everything we need to know about what made this movie special. It wasn't about perfection or following a formula. It was about capturing lightning in a bottle and having the courage to let it shine, even when the people in charge thought it was too dangerous or too weird for mainstream audiences. That's the real lesson of Blazing Saddles. Sometimes the best art comes from embracing the unexpected, fighting for your vision when others don't understand it, and remembering that comedy at its best can change the world one laugh at a time. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, a complete stranger will walk through your movie shot and accidentally make it even better than you ever imagined. If this story of Hollywood rebellion and accidental genius has entertained you, I'd love for you to hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you ever noticed that mysterious man in the sweater during your viewings of Blazing Saddles? What other movie bloopers do you think actually made the films better? And if you want to hear more incredible stories about the movies that changed everything, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Trust me, there are so many more amazing Hollywood secrets just waiting to be discovered, and I can't wait to share them with you.